Hi, everybody. It's Steve Jagger, co-founder of Addy. Today, I've got two special guests with me. One is Steve Saretsky, residential realtor extraordinaire out of Vancouver, and also the host of the Looney Hour podcast. And Mark Goodman, commercial real estate broker extraordinaire. And so we're going to have a little chat today about what's going on in Lower Mainland, real estate, residential, commercial, what's happening in kind of the greater Canada picture and where we are headed. So, Mark, Steve, thanks for joining.
Thank
Be
you.
fun. Look forward to
So,
it.
Steve, you're the OG
I
podcaster.
I'm just
We-
I'm just here to pick Mark's brain.
I don't know how much
Perfect.
there is to pick, but go ahead.
Well, maybe where do you guys want to start? You want to start talking about kind of the market recap? We're at the end of 2024. Um, how things have gone from a Lower Mainland point of view, kind of residentially and commercially. I don't know which one of you wants to start, but just kind of like how was the year? Was it good, bad, ugly?
I could start it off, and then
Sure.
I'm curious to hear Mark's thoughts. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think on the residential side, I mean, I think that we started the year off like pretty weak, pretty soft. Obviously, the psyche of Canadian consumers is when interest rates start moving down is the sentiment started to improve. So I think we went from like really sour sentiment, things were really pessimistic, sales volumes were really low. And then as rates went down from 6% down into the low fours, and the Bank of Canada started cutting, we saw people getting off the sidelines. I think it depends, and I'm curious to hear Mark's thoughts, but like I think what we're finding is that it really depends on like where you're shopping and what there's different segments. So normally like you get into these like bull markets of like 2021, 2020, 2021, where like everything is going up. Everything's hot, everything's going up. It's just a matter of is it going up 8% or 12%, like it's going up. Whereas like today we're finding is like there's all these little segments of the market. Like, if you've got an entry level single family detached house, where we don't build them anymore. I mean, building permits in BC for single family houses are at 30-year lows. You just don't build single family anymore. There's still a desire. So you have the natural supply constraint there that those markets are still performing just honestly quite well. I mean, the prices are actually up this year. Whereas we're seeing other weaknesses in that investor space. I think that a lot of those investor dollars have been scared out of the market. So people that normally would buy a one-bedroom condo, I mean, most people are cash flow negative now at today's interest rates. I think the pre-sale market's been really soft. Again, like think about pre-sales. I mean, the majority of pre-sale purchasers that are willing to wait 3, 4, 5 years for a completed unit, most of those people are investors. And so the investor dollars haven't come back into the market. And so I think that's where you're seeing weakness is really in the investment side. But I think on the end user side, I think that market's doing just fine.
Gotcha. Mark, would you say is it the same thing in the commercial side? I know that's like a whole different world of how
Yeah.
your world works versus the residential side.
Well, there's definitely a lot of overlap between the two worlds. I mean, we're still residential under the commercial umbrella being multifamily, but a lot of the same themes we're experiencing. Um, I have in front of me notes because we're just after this podcast, we're going to send out through the Goodman Report sort of our year-end salute, a recap of some of the themes. So I thought it's actually quite timely. We can talk about that. So some of the themes that I've written down that I'd say characterize 2024, inflation is finally under control. Interest rates went up and then they went down, and now they're sort of going up again. So it's a bit choppy. The increase in capital gains caused a flurry of sales right down to the wire. I mean, we sold $90 million, 5 or 6 deals just before the deadline. And for a lot of our clients, the savings were over $1 million because their cost base was so low, so low. So that was a big news item. There's been changes to the Residential Tenancy Act on, giving notice and how many months and how much you have to pay and some other items that it's further eroding property rights in BC. There's been astronomical increases in development cost charges known as DCCs. Those are to take effect in 2025. So again, just another roadblock for developers to build our desperately needed housing. Then we now just recently the vacancy tax on land, which is just insane. We can get into that a little later, Steve. I'm sure you have some opinions on that. Court-ordered sales, receiverships, they continue to grow. We've got several listings right now at Goodman Commercial where we're navigating that process. Land use policies are totally in flux. TOA, transit-oriented area development, all the policy guidelines. For those of you who don't know, basically the province is forcing the municipalities to build without restrictions on height and density to encourage development because unfortunately politics reign supreme in various municipalities and we can't get anything done. So that's a big item in 2024. Broadway plan revisions. We just put out an article a couple days ago. It was picked up, so BIV's publishing our op-ed, as well as the Real Estate News Exchange on the amendments to the Broadway plan. In a nutshell, they are reducing or they're lifting the restrictions in some high density areas so that you can now build as many towers as possible. There's still municipal guidelines, 80-foot separations and setbacks, but by the transit hubs, you're not going to be restricted to 2 or 3 towers. And in some areas, they're increasing density. That's been a very contentious plan as well. The other, I'd say, noteworthy trend, softening rents for the first time in years in Vancouver. There has been a pronounced shift in rental rates, downward shift. And everybody's got an opinion why, but I think it's a confluence of factors. I think there's definitely more supply coming, rental supply. Also, the economy is not doing well. People just simply can't afford those rates. That's impacted a lot of people, particularly developers who were making projections based on revenue that they can't realize today. So that's been significant. And the other, I think, noteworthy trend, the nonprofit sector has become a dominant buyer using our taxpayer dollars to buy older rental buildings. And that's a whole other topic there, but who would have thought that nonprofits would become one of the more dominant players? In fact, our mid-year review, they represented 50% of the entire market in the suburbs of dollar volume in terms of purchases, which is unheard of. So they've become a major player. So those were the themes that I think were noteworthy for 2024.
This is a good list. Steve, that was longer than your list.
I'm like, yeah, I'm just as curious here. This is there's so many threads to pull on there.
Yeah, maybe the first one, the vacant, what's it called? The vacant land tax. That's a federal law. I had Bo Jarvis on this podcast the other day from West Group, and he had talked a lot about that. He'd written a letter to Chrystia Freeland. Actually, while we were recording the pod, Chrystia had just resigned, so there was a lot in flux at that moment. But he was talking a little bit about that vacant land tax. So Mark, like, what, just for people, like, what is it? They're basically trying to tax landholders, basically tax them into developing their land, like get them moving, essentially.
Exactly. And it's so counterintuitive. Bo wrote the most amazing letter, and I think it's on his LinkedIn profile,
Yeah.
went viral. And I think Brad Jones from West Group as well put something out. Just amazing. What these guys are doing is amazing advocacy for the industry, really spelling out why it's detrimental. But essentially, what our government is trying to do is to encourage developers to build and not to speculate. It's ridiculous. Why would a developer want to sit on vacant land and get taxed with no revenue coming in? The business model is to build as quickly as possible to reduce your expenses and your
Holding costs.
liability.
Yeah.
So it's not the only reason why builders and housing providers aren't building faster is because of all the challenges and the roadblocks that the municipalities put up. You know, the entitlement process is years. It's years. And that's a whole other topic of what you can do and why. But essentially, they're layering another tax on. And so if you're a developer, you're going to think twice because you've just added another line item to your pro forma, additional expense, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so if what they're doing the opposite of what they should be reducing all the red tape, all the roadblocks. They should reduce the entitlement process. They should reduce the DCCs, DCACs, any tax, and they need to expedite the process. Every professional consultant, anybody in the business knows that one of the biggest drains to a pro forma is the timeline and all the additional taxes. And all they're doing is they're throwing bad policy after bad policy. They're doubling down on bad policies. We actually already have a speculation tax and vacancy tax here. So, which is again a problem. I don't know how much it'll do to the Vancouver market. And Steve, maybe you'll know a little bit more about this, but if you're actively going through the rezoning process or entitlement process, I don't think you're being taxed at that time. So it'll be interesting to see how the feds ask the municipalities to implement this vacancy tax and whether the devil will be in the details, who knows? But it's just totally counterintuitive.
Yeah, I was under the impression if you had a permit in process that, you wouldn't be subject to that. I was just curious if in your experience, and we were dealing with like, let's say a land assembly, just acquired a developer acquires a land assembly, let's say have 4 vacant houses. Are they typically paying the underutilized housing tax and or the speculation tax and or the city of Vancouver empty homes tax if those dwellings are vacant? Because like I imagine like it takes time to obviously get these permits and
It
plan.
does. Yeah.
And so I wonder how often these guys typically get hit with these taxes.
I think you are taxed, and we've done some land assemblies where, the developer wanted the tenants to stay in. I mean, it helps with getting the properties insured, and
Yeah.
you're avoiding the vacancy tax or to be honest, there's so many taxes, I can't even keep track anymore. Like the litany of taxes and rules and
Yeah.
regulations is just overwhelming.
I
There's a lot of
almost wonder though if you're
overlapping taxes, right?
Oh
The
yeah.
Vancouver's got an empty homes tax, the province has got one, and federally there's one. It's all kind of the same thing.
but now like
It's
Mark, if you're a developer and you're like, well, yeah, a lot of them might want the rental income coming in because for insurance and things of that nature, but also to start to wonder like, and again, you'll probably have more clarity on this than I will, but like just how punitive the BC tenancy laws have become that you're almost like I want like from what I hear anyways with like the smaller builders that are like, oh, I'm going to build tear down a single family house and build a duplex. A lot of them don't want to deal with the tenants. They don't want to assume them. They want to get in, start permitting, start building because
yeah.
it's just too difficult to get rid of these tenants.
Yeah, I mean there is a process where once you get your development permit, you can give notice to vacate the suites, and it's you have to pay so much money depending on how long they've lived in the building. But it's true. We've just put under contract a strata titled building in North Vancouver. And one of the concerns that the developer had was, he didn't want these owner occupiers in the strata building to start renting out the building while the developer goes through the entitlement process. Because if they sign a lease 2 months, a 1 year lease, 2 months before possession date of this strata windup, they're not going to be able to start digging a year. And you're going to have to wait about a year if that's the lease. So we had to negotiate to make sure that any owners that started renting out their unit while we were waiting for the closing date, it would be month to month by the time he closed. And even then there's risk for the developer because the rules are heavily weighted in favor of the tenant. And so even if the law is on your side, there's the optics and the politics, and it's tough. If a tenant wants to dig in their heels, it's going to be a problem for the developer. I'm all for tenant rights and having an equilibrium and having balance. I think that's important. But there are times where it becomes very difficult for developers who are risking a lot of money and time to build housing and then to have a roadblock like this.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's a common theme we hear from the developer community around how difficult this stuff is. But on the flip side, I'm sure Steve, you get in the comments whenever you mention stuff like this, is that the comments are like, "Well, boo-hoo, too bad for the big developer that makes all the money." But I just don't think people totally realize how much risk a developer takes, how much risk their investors take in getting a property from a empty vacant land to dig the hole to build the whatever it is that they're building, start to finish is high risk stuff.
I
Well,
mean,
it's a
yeah,
6 or 7 year process where one of those inputs, you're projecting forward what construction costs are going to be and your soft costs and your holding cost. We had the perfect storm. I mean, interest rates went through the roof, and for a lot of our developer clients, they're paying prime plus whatever, and construction costs went through the roof. Meanwhile, there was a labor shortage, and they couldn't find workers. And then the pre-sales, they didn't hit their targets. And it was the perfect storm. So a lot of these developers got hurt and will continue to be hurt. This vilification of developers and realtors and housing providers, it's unfortunate that theme continues, but they're really doing a service. We should applaud these developers for having the patience and the fortitude to go through all the challenges and the roadblocks with such massive risk. We need these people. They're building our parks and our infrastructure and providing money for daycares and all these other amenities. And so it's unfortunate, particularly David Eby has been really unfair to the industry with the vilification of landlords and developers. And it's really sad. In the housing business, he said, oh, we have to put in all these restrictions for landlords because, and taxes because the big REITs and the institutions are speculating and they're flipping homes and they're kicking tenants out on the street. And I'm saying this is ridiculous. No one's getting kicked out on the street. In fact, you want these corporations, you want these REITs and these institutions because number one, they're well capitalized, they're accountable, they're modernizing these buildings, and they're treating tenants well. And it's often the bad apples are the private ones. So you have these, and these institutions and REITs. They only represent 10% of the trades year over year, if that, 10% of the market. Yet somehow there's this narrative that they're taking over and causing unaffordability. They're the ones actually building homes. They're the ones that are actually keeping these buildings afloat. So and then he says the international buyers they're coming in. There's no international buyers. There's a foreign buyers tax. Even before the foreign buyers tax, there were no foreign buyers buying apartment buildings. We did a survey for the Globe and Mail years ago. Our last 200 transactions in the multifamily space. Do you know how many foreign buyers there were? Two. One from the United States and one from Austria. That was it. Two. So the misinformation out there is incredible. And this is just something that we've continually tried to set the record straight with fact-based reporting. Anyways, I went on a bit of a rant there, but
no, it's good. I was just curious, Mark, what your outlook is on in the development space for next year. Selfishly, I have this question because I just look at it, and again, obviously in my space, I just look at what's happening with some of the pre-sale numbers, and I look a lot of the stuff that's sort of in the pipeline today that I know is completing over the next 6 to 12 months, and I go, wow, okay, well, I mean, a lot of those units were sold at sort of peak valuations in 2021, 2022 that are coming up for completion. And some of them I start to wonder, on appraisal values and things of that nature. But I was kind of curious what you see, at least on the commercial side, kind of moving forward next year.
well, a lot of the bigger developers, their cost base is a lot lower than the market value today because they've been holding it for many years. And so the bigger developers are doing okay. Many of these projects, they'll just break even and move on. Maybe some of these developers will take a loss, but when you average out a 10-year period, they're still doing well. I find, and the experiences I've had, and by the way, the bigger guys are also not coming out unscathed. I mean, it just depends on your timing. but I do feel that we're going to see that's the smaller developers who purchased land at the peak of the market and are getting caught up in the storm with the rising interest rates. We see it all over foreclosures. Banks are calling the loans. And I think we're going to be in this tough period for several more months. And we're going to hear more stories coming out of developers losing their projects.
And
And I don't know. I don't think this is going to stop anytime soon. We still got a long way to go.
when I did that, I'll put the link to this article or the video I did the other day with Bo, but he kind of talked about that, Bo from West Group, around because I said like, how come some projects seem to can move forward, some developers can just keep going, and others can't, and some of them are small that keep going, or mid-sized developers, and some of the big guys also keep going, and some of them hold their projects. And he's basically said like some of the small guys, he's like, because they're big enough that them and the Anis and the Bosas or whatever can if rules change or things happen, they have the ability to kind of just slow roll it and just keep moving their way through slowly, where he's like some of the small and medium sized developers don't have the luxury of time. And so they'll agree to certain things that the city requires them to do. And they know they probably shouldn't do it, but they do it because they just need to get going. They need to get building. And he's like, some of them, they don't even know that the project's not going to work out. It's just like they must keep going. And so it's like death by a thousand cuts, where the bigger guys can just kind of hold on for a little longer and wait through some of the more difficult periods. It was very
Mhm.
interesting take. But he even said lots of their projects, he's like, some of these guys, like their projects are underwater and they won't work. And he's like, our projects might not be as profitable, but he's like, for sure, there's some of them that maybe we should be holding, or they're a little bit profitable, but he's like, we're not unscathed either. Like he's like, it's a
Yeah.
hard market out there.
Well, also the challenge for these developers is they got to feed the machine. I mean, West Group is
Yeah,
a massive company.
he did
Boza,
talk about that
Concord,
too. Yeah,
Polygon. I mean, they've got staff, and so I mean that's part of the value of these companies is that experience and that skill, and you want to retain those employees and those staff, and so you got to make a judgment call, and you have to keep the machine going and build. And a lot of these big developers have been around. They look at they play the long game. They look at a 10-year picture, and you're going to win. Generally in a 10-year period, you're going to have two amazing blockbuster years, and then you're going to have, say, eight average years up and down, but generally roughly the same, and then you're going to have two awful years. So, we went from an explosive market. I remember when COVID hit, what was it, March 2020, interest rates were virtually nothing. And I remember coming into the office, there was nobody here, a skeleton crew. We're an essential service, so we had to keep the lights on. My staff were all essentially working from home, remoting in. And I didn't know what the hell was going to happen for 2 months. And then things just absolutely exploded. And it was a year and a half redlining it. We did over $500 million in sales in 2021, 39 deals, 23 of which were unconditional. And everybody, although it was a tough time, money was cheap and it just fueled the market. And as we all know, we went into this never-ending roller coaster of interest rates and inflation, and it really cooled the market. For anybody who hasn't been in the business for, longer than 25 years, you've never seen a cycle like this. And it's been a long, long, painful cycle. And not just for developers, for anybody who's in the transaction-based business. I mean, if you're a realtor, you're a mortgage broker, some mortgage brokers doing very well, because they can refinance. But generally, anybody who's tied to real estate in a transactional type business has been affected by this market.
down. Yeah. Yeah. So, Mark, you mentioned that the rents are coming down. Steve, is that the same thing you're seeing? Rents are coming down here?
Yeah, I mean, we just see it on like, your retail one bedroom condos, two bedroom, stuff in the city that, mom and pop investors would typically rent out. We're seeing basically turnover rents are dropping, right? So it's like if you put somebody in last year near the top of the rental market, we're seeing about on average, it seems to be about a 10% decline. So if that tenant leaves, you might be filling that vacancy. So let's say a one bedroom in, downtown Vancouver was $2,800. I mean, you might be filling that vacancy today at, 26 or 26.50, something along those in that range. So I think it's an adjustment for people, right? I mean, so like it's interesting because when you layer that on, a lot of these landlords are being hit with obviously renewing mortgages at much higher rates, or you're seeing strata fees obviously going up faster than the rate of inflation, cost of maintaining these buildings. So I think for the investor, I definitely think these are challenging times after what have been a relatively breezy 7 or 8 years.
What would you guys attribute to the rents going down? Like why are they going
I mean, I'm
down?
curious Mark's thoughts. I've got some opinions of my own, but
I think it's a confluence of factors. I think there's definitely more product hitting the market, and we're going to see more in the next 2 or 3 years. We're going to see even more product. A lot of them are under construction now. These are purpose-built rental buildings. So I think that's number one. There's just more supply. I think number two, the economy is just generally not doing very well, and people just simply can't afford these rental rates anymore. Um, and also, I understand that immigration has slowed. And so I think all those factors combined, and we had a very rapid escalation in rent. So it's not surprising to have some adjustment, but within like a 2 or 3 week period, and I know when it's happening because I have clients call me and they're just scratching their head saying, Mark, what program should I use to rent my suites? I was using Craigslist and I was using Marketplace, but no one's calling me. Is there a new program? Is there something I'm missing here? And when you start getting a half a dozen calls within a week, you know that something's up. And lo and behold, RBC comes out with a report. I can't remember. It was like 2 bedrooms. The average drop was like 400. No, what was it? $400 or something like that. It was pretty significant. So for sure, we just sold a building, a concrete high rise west of Denman, just blue chip real estate. And the buyer was like, why are there 3 or 4 vacancies? Can you rent them out for us? And they were renting the suites out, advertising at the same rate, and still a lot of challenges. So I'd say particularly in these higher end areas have probably been hit the hardest.
Yeah, Steve, you
yeah.
think is that the same? Is that where you say supply and
Well, yeah, I think I would
immigration?
agree with Mark. I think the big thing is I think the economy is probably weaker than what the official stats might show you. I mean, I think
The
that
vibe session.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I would argue that we're in a recession. I mean, I think that it's funny to you just see all these like signposts that are coming out. I have to laugh, right? So the NDP comes out and says yesterday their budget deficit was $9 billion. And they don't. Well, main reason for that was tax revenues are down. Well, it's like, well, I mean, they've come out and sort of vilified the one industry that was paying all the bills. And is of course, and to Mark's point, I think is going to still really struggle here over the next little while. And so I start to wonder, like, what does the employment sector look like in the construction space, right? If they stop building new housing, Mark, you mentioned like, I always like it's interesting, right? Because like you see all these politicians, like Krista Freeland talks about it all the time, when she, of course, when she was finance minister, she keeps talking about, oh, look at the housing starts numbers in Canada. Oh, they were up this month. They're up month over month. But it's like I think we all know, like housing starts it takes so long to get to what we call a housing start that it's such a lagging indicator that like so when you sort of start modeling and penciling like housing starts 12, 24 months from now, you're like these things are going to roll off a cliff.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
don't like those numbers. It's kind of like when they say, "Oh, look how many rezoning applications there are in the Broadway plan. There's been a rush to build." And I'm thinking, well, first of all, a lot of those buildings there are currently they weren't purchased, they weren't acquired. It's the current owner going through the entitlement process to just set themselves up so they don't get landlocked or orphaned. Because and now they've changed the rules a little bit, but so that was one of the reasons. And a lot of that process started 3 years ago. So So now they start coming out, and you have this data set, and they're thinking, oh, well, this is reflective of this moment in time. No, it's not. It started years ago. You see development sites closing, and you look at, I see a rental site at $200 a foot buildable when I know the market's, not more than 150 a foot buildable right now on the Broadway plan. I got a couple listings, and they're saying, oh, look, 200 a foot buildable just closed. I'm like, yeah, they made their business decision 2 years ago. They went firm, and now they close. So that 200 a foot buildable is reflective of the market 2 years ago. That's one of the challenges we have in the real estate market is all the sales that you see, particularly in this environment over the last year, closing periods have been extended significantly from previous years because a lot of these buyers are relying on CMHC insured financing. And instead of being able to get approved in 30 or 60 days, I'm hearing it could take 6, 7, 8 months
6 months.
in
Yeah.
some cases. So, I mean, we don't often what a lot of these buyers will do is that they'll close with conventional funds and then just bridge it and roll into a CMHC insured mortgage after the fact because you don't want to have a property under contract for 6 months. But the numbers that you see at the end of the day, you have to always ask, well, when was the business decision made? When did they go firm on the deal? Because the closing date is not a good indicator of activity.
Yeah,
Right.
I think that's an important distinction. And I just was going to add on the softness in rents. I mean, if you look at youth unemployment in Canada is at the highest it's been since the global financial crisis, right? And those are people aged what, 15 to 24. So, I mean, if you're 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 years old, I mean, like you're probably renting. And so,
Or
I
living
think
at home.
yeah, or living at home, right? But I mean, I think if you look at it and say, well, it's really hard for me to get a job, and I'm certainly not getting a raise in this environment, like you're probably not going out and dropping $2,800 on a one bedroom. You're probably just going to go and stay with your parents and or same thing on the immigration side, right? I mean, immigrant unemployment is exactly the same. It's like, you come here to work or go to school. I mean, obviously you're going to end up in the rental pool, but if there's no work to pay the bills, I mean, you either just end up living with two or three people to keep costs down. And so, household formation falls. So I think there's a lot of things going on. I think that ultimately it all comes down to like a weak economy.
Right. Do you think like if part of the rents dropping is due to an increased supply, and part of what both of you said is that's sort of an aspect of it, do you guys think the argument of increasing supply of developments property generally would decrease the price, or is that not correlated?
It's causal. It's a cause and effect. If you increase supply, the cost will come down. And anybody who thinks economics 101 is some, propaganda document, it needs to go and learn about the law of economics. And
Why do you think it's so hard though for this concept? Like, because it seems logical. Let the builders build. There'd be more choices, drops the price. But
I think
they go the
Look at
other
all
route of
these like
let's tax it.
look at all the Sunbelt cities in America, and even like I think Calgary's of that nature too. Here, it's just like every up market they just unleash the taps. Everybody builds like crazy. Rents fall, and
yeah, I think there's probably numerous reasons why people try to fight this supply uh, perspective. It was interesting. I hosted a gentleman named Bob Knackle, who's really one of the foremost commercial real estate brokers in Manhattan, and on a
On your
podcast
podcast.
on my podcast just started. I'm trying to catch up to Steve and you, and it was
We're all
really
following
interesting.
Steve.
He never really got into politics, but New York City is the perfect example of what not to do when they instituted so many rules and regulations like vacancy control and so forth, and disincentivizing developers. And I mean, they have a myriad of policies. It's a very complex in New York. What he said was during COVID, it was the perfect sort of way to look at how supply reduces rents. And you could check it out. It's the first podcast I've ever done. It's on the Goodman Report podcast.
It's his number one podcast.
It's my number one. Well, I have a trailer, so that counts as number one. So this is
There you
number
go.
two. But what he said was, so New York goes into lockdown, and he leaves for the country on he has a little country home, and basically Manhattan was like a ghost city for months. And he said all these people left, and in a way, it was like increasing the supply. Rents dropped 30%. There has never been a land use policy or anything in New York that ever brought it down past 10%. And the one thing that brought down rents was increased supply by virtue of people moving. So you can't get much better. That's like a controlled experiment where all things being equal, you just jack up the supply literally overnight and rents dropped by 30%. Now you have these guys like Patrick Condon, who's an architect from UBC. I didn't know he was an economist or, sticking his nose into this. He's always in the media about literally fighting against this concept that supply is not the problem. And I just don't understand. I don't get it. None of it makes sense. Of course, it's supply. Everything that we have done that we're focusing on here in BC in the city are demand side restraints. They're taxing. They're layer over layer of policy, whether it's making the development process longer or really what they're doing is uh, I'm gonna fumble this. They're disincentivizing the development community from building because of all these taxes. And so really what they're
Mark,
doing is they're penalizing the people that need to increase the supply. And because they've dug a hole and it's so deep, they double down on their failed policies. If you look at what happened in Seattle, Steve, you made a good point when you're looking at other cities. Seattle, they reduced the red tape. And what happened? They started building and rental rates came down. So I just think we have to keep focusing on the supply side of the equation to really create an equilibrium here.
I gotta just to jump onto Mark's point there. Just the here's the list I put together. So this is a presentation I gave to Parliament a couple months ago, but basically there's a list of demand side measures. So in 2016, they brought in the foreign buyers tax. In 2017, they brought in the Vancouver empty homes tax. In 2018, they brought in the BC speculation tax. They then brought in the BC school tax, which is a tax on luxury homes in 2018. They increased the foreign buyers tax again in 2018. They increased the property transfer tax on luxury homes 2018. Mortgage stress test 2018. Increased empty homes tax 2021. The federal underutilized housing tax 2022. The federal foreign buyer ban 2023. The Airbnb ban 2024. The flipping tax 2024. And then the increased capital gains inclusion rate 2024.
It's a nice happy list. It's funny. I was
That's
talking
crazy.
talking the other
Can't keep
day.
track of them all.
Yeah, well, I was talking the other day, and they were talking about increasing Hollywood North and how do we get more movie production and stuff up here. And the way the government does it is tax incentives. They get discounts on taxes to bring production up into British Columbia from Hollywood. And that was the whole concept. Was like that. If you want to grow something, that seems logical. Is like give them tax benefits, pull that stuff off, and then you get these productions. And the argument was like maybe we should be doing that in the housing space. Is like they know how to do it. If you want to incentivize it, incentivize it.
It's crazy. What is that, Mark? Like it's like what's the cost of a new home is what 30% of the cost is
Yeah,
taxes and fees.
something like that. In fact, West Group, again, they put out an amazing video on the layer after layer of costs associated with building homes. And the land costs and the soft costs and the hard costs. Some of the biggest costs are the taxes. I think they represent about 30% of the entire
Yeah, I think
project.
government makes more money than the developer does.
There
I
was something
believe.
like if a condo is worth, I think it was like 15 or $1,600 a square foot at the end of the day,
Yeah.
and you remove the cost of land and you remove the profit of the developer, you're still costing, it's still going to cost a consumer $1,100 a square foot. In other words, the biggest cost really is the government standing in your way. And uh, it just behooves me that this narrative continues. And I always wonder, like, why aren't people seeing the light? These are facts. And I maybe it's just the way people consume information now in like 30-second clips on social media. I don't know, Steve. Like, what do you like how is it that it's like everyone's a freaking flat earther. I just
Yeah.
don't get it.
I feel like the pendulum is going to and is starting to swing back in the other direction. I think we kind of went so far in one direction that now I think people are saying, okay, well, we tried that. Maybe it doesn't work. I don't know. I'm optimistic. I think that, obviously I think we'll get a new federal government next year. And I think the BC election results, I think, indicated there was some dissatisfaction with the current government. So I'm hopeful that I think things are shifting in the other direction. But yeah, I don't know. I think housing affordability is
It's
a
massive.
problem. It won't be solved in the next decade. But
Yeah. Well, we see like, what do you guys, I don't know if you have thoughts on like BC government pushing down that multiplex, essentially infill housing, whatever you want to call it, of single family lots to enable, I guess, more developers to build, but more small and medium sized developers to be able to get involved, do it in a whole bunch of different cities all at the same time. Do you think that's helpful? We're seeing in sort of the Addy world, we're seeing lots of discussions, lots of conversations around those types of multiplexes. I'm involved in one of them in Kelowna, making a sixplex, right near the hospital there. Do you guys like, do you think that's a helpful push of like forcing some of these municipalities to allow some of this stuff? Was that good policy, good, right direction, wrong direction? What do you guys think?
Mark, do you want to go first?
No, I'm going to defer to you on this, Steve. I don't have an opinion on this particular
Okay.
topic.
I mean, so here's what I think. I think it's not an easy answer, but I think that from what I see, anyways, we work with a lot of just end user families. That's like one of our largest clientele, and so I think there's a huge void and a need for like the missing middle, which is like it's either like you're in a single family house that's $2.5 million, or you're in like a 2 bedroom condo. It seems like we didn't really build townhouses and duplexes, and so I think shifting to this ground oriented multiplex, I think is a good necessity. I think people still want a front door and a little yard, so I think it's wise policy. I think the challenge is again like making it feasible. So, I have to laugh because government gets involved and says, I think like taking away some of the power from these municipalities, I think it was almost necessary, but at the same time, it's like, I have to laugh. Like City of Burnaby is one of the prime examples here. So part of them changing the zoning for the BC government's mandate. They said, okay, yeah, we'll change all the zoning, multiplexes everywhere now. Sean Fraser, the housing minister at the federal level, cuts them a check for $43 million. And then we find out that the new multiplex, they're going to be charging about $100,000 a door in development charges. So if you want to build a fourplex, you're nearing a $400,000 fees.
Just to get started.
And it's like, so it's like I don't care how much land you rezone, you can rezone the entire country, but if it's not economically viable, it's not getting built. So I think that's the challenge. Is I think the multiplex is a good concept, but at the end of the day, it's just math, and I think the math
Yeah.
is not going to work in many cases.
It's interesting to see how some of these municipalities are kind of either fighting back against it. All you hear about is like West Vancouver doing everything they can to stay out of it. I think they've buckled now, I believe, and have sort of succumbed to the province's pressure. But like the city of Kelowna, they went and pre-zoned, I think it's 13,000 single family lots that they've pre-zoned, saying these are ready to go for these small multiplexes, sewage is ready, pipes are ready. And if you use one of the city of Kelowna's predefined architectural drawings, they'll give you a building permit in 10 days. So I think that seems like a neat program. They're trying to speed up the time problem, which is a huge cost for these developers. The time is the big piece, and by pre-zoning it and identifying the properties, like it seems like Cologne is on the right path that others could potentially follow.
Yeah, and then just to add to Burnaby's again, so they've kind of increased the density even for like these tower developments. And but what they've done is they raise their development fees for high density by close to 50,000 per unit. So like on a one bedroom condo, that's nearly 10% of the price. That's just and
Yeah.
that's a one time increase. I'm not saying that's the fee. It was an additional 50,000 in terms of what they already. So it's like, it's like, okay, well, you've increased the density. You say, well, we're going to increase the density. So now instead of going from whatever it is, 30 stories, we're going to let you build 35 stories or whatever they did there. But it's like, but you offset it by, it's net. There's no difference. The project is not any more viable than it was. But of course, it was sufficient enough to get a $43 million check from the government. So, yeah, I mean, these are just the games of politics, and that's why I said I don't think housing affordability gets fixed in the next decade, but we can hope.
We can do our best. Maybe you guys, one of you guys or both of you should run for politics of some sort and get involved.
Are you kidding me?
Hey, Mark, I got a question for you on the Broadway plan. I know you're quite active in that space. So, like, what are you seeing? It looks to me like from from what I'm seeing from a high level perspective, it looks like everyone's going rental. Is that just strictly the numbers just don't work at all to do
Yeah,
condos?
good question. In a lot of areas, you have to go rental. So if you're redeveloping an existing property on RM zone land that has existing rental units,
Right.
you must necessarily build rental. We actually have a vacant site right now, 414 East 10th in the Broadway plan. It's 150 front feet, so it meets the guidelines for frontage. And the building burnt down due to a fire. So you actually don't have the tenant relocation costs that you normally would have, where you have to pay each tenant a certain amount of money depending on how long they've lived there. In that case, because it's vacant and there's no rental property, we actually spoke to the city and they said that because it was a rental property, you'd have to wait 3 years. So there's a 3-year window where if you're redeveloping this property, it has to stay a rental. If you're redeveloping a property that didn't have rental on the site, it's quite possible that you could do condo, but I think in most cases, you're not going to get the same density. So then you have to kind of look at the cost benefit because when you're building rental, you have to provide some below market housing. And if you're building condo, you have to provide some social housing turnkey to the city. So you really got to, it depends on the area and the site, and you got to run the numbers. But in most cases, most of the applications are for rental development.
Okay.
So, for example, if you're building if you've got a 150-foot site, you could build a 6.5 FSR in a lot of cases by a transit station. That's about 20 stories. 20% of the building has to be below market rental housing. So the tenants can come back that have been displaced at the same rent that they were paying or 20% below CMHC averages for that area, whichever is lower. So,
Yeah, it seems
yeah,
interesting
it's
to me
busy.
though, right? Like if
Sorry?
it seems interesting to me that like so what you're saying is like if I'm a tenant and say I was living in this 1970s old beat up wood frame condo. I was paying, I don't know, one bedroom was paying $1,400 a month. A developer comes in and says, I'm building a tower. I build this nice new fancy rental building, and the market rent is not 1,400, it's more like 3 grand. But the old tenant that got booted out, they get to move back into that completed tower and keep paying $1,400 a month. That's correct, right?
Yeah.
Which is amazing because like you think about that person. I mean, I understand the hardship the tenants involved in there, but they get basically a brand new place. And
Not only that, while they're waiting for the property to be developed, however many years that is, the developer has to top up their rent. in the event that they're paying more than they were in the existing old wood frame building.
Wow.
And
So
what's the theory though? The trade-off is that the city gives them more height and it's meant to be able to pay for, like, if you're taking out a 20 unit apartment building and building a big tower, isn't that right? They give you more height with the theory that that extra money or extra height gives you extra revenue to help cover
yeah, I mean
some of this.
they're trying to create equilibrium where there's enough incentive for the developer to build, and in return, though, they're getting below market rents that are affordable. And so there's this tug of war because the reality is that unless you're at a high enough density, if you're in a 3.5 FSR zone, say, forget about Broadway Plan now, transit-oriented area development where it's this provincial initiative, the numbers just don't pencil out. Like if you're not getting enough density, you're not going to get anything built because you're not going to get any homes built because the numbers don't work, particularly if there's a below market component. In order for you to build, and when you put that line item into the 20%, and that's why when you have these pundits saying, "Oh, every development should be 50% below market," well, you're just not going to build any housing. Just nothing's going to be built, and you're not going to ease the pressure. And then there's this continued discussion. Well, supply actually won't cost. It's not. That's not the reason why. Supply is not going to help with affordability. I mean, so yeah, the numbers often don't pencil out. You just need enough density, and you need to be in an area where the land, the final product, either the rental rates or the price per square foot that someone's willing to pay, makes sense.
So I've got a question. I got a question for you, Mark. So one of the things that I get, again, just dealing with a retail client here that is maybe less sophisticated than your investor type clients there, but like every homeowner just assumes, they look at this and say, I've got this single family house. All of a sudden, I'm in this TOA. I must be worth X amount more, and I'm just going to get bought out. And I'm curious from your perspective, kind of what you see with the TOA, because like my initial thoughts is like, well, hold on a minute, we're already in a really soft sort of down land market. We've now just taken some of the scarcity that was out of Vancouver development, which is like, if you can acquire land and then go through the painful process of rezoning it, you've kind of just increased your land lift there, right? Through a lot of like blood, sweat, and tears. But if you just kind of go and open up the whole city and say, or the whole province, and say, well, you can pretty much develop not anywhere, but you can build all this land or in these TOA areas. You kind of remove a lot of the land scarcity in the process too. Like, how do you then value dirt in these areas?
Yeah. Well, you've just supported my supply argument, Steve. I mean, that's the interesting thing, is that all these landowners that call us, and we're getting a ton of calls, a lot of these blocks, they've assembled themselves and they'll call the Goodman team to help them market the property, and we'll run the numbers. Number one, a lot of these municipalities didn't have the rules and regulations to really talk about what you could actually do in these various cities, whether it's Coquitlam or Surrey or wherever. Because the province gives you an overriding density requirements, but then it's up to the city to talk about what type of tenure, condo, rental, pace of change, how many developments you could do per year, what your frontage requirements are, what the below market component will be. So just because somebody says, oh, we're going to give you a 6.5 FSR here, well, the devil's in the details. And most cities didn't come out with those guidelines. So that was the first challenge that we had, is like, we don't even know what we're looking at. Burnaby pushed back for a long time, didn't even want to comply with the province. Then they did an about face. Secondly, the values. In most cases, the highest and best, well, not in most, in a lot of cases, the highest and best use is the existing improvement. And that's the other thing. There's this educational process. Just because the city says, or the province says, we're going to upzone all these areas, doesn't mean that the highest and best use is redevelopment. In a lot of cases, the existing property is worth more than a developer is willing to pay for the land. Number three, a lot of our clients say, well, we're just going to wait. We're going to wait. I'm like, okay, you can wait. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can tell you one thing. Like you said, Steve, if the entire city is a construction site and everything can possibly potentially be redeveloped, then you've just generally increased the supply. And it's quite possible that, instead of there being 10 listings in a specific area, there could be 50. And that's going to bring down the price. So there's all these different forces in flux right now.
Mhm.
But I think the supply part of the equation has been underlooked.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. It's kind of what I figured, but interesting to hear your perspective on that.
So supply. It sounds like if I know we're getting pretty close here to the end. Do you guys have thoughts on like we're coming into the end of the year? Like what is 2025 gonna look like? Interest rates keep going down. Ottawa switches teams and switches gears from political parties. Like what are you guys thinking? What's happening in 2025? What do you think? Is it gonna be good, bad, the same? I don't know. Steve, you want to go first?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that I still think it's going to be a mixed bag. I think that the end user product where there's like demand. Again, I look at entry level single family where not only young families that are competing for a detached house, they're all the builders are looking for those lots too, right? To redevelop into duplexes and multiplexes. So I think there's an underlying bid there where, again, if we talk about supply and demand, I think there's an undersupply of single family dwellings, and the demand outpaces that. And then I still think the investor side, I think, is still going to be impaired. I just think I still think, yeah, variable rate mortgages are coming down, the Bank of Canada is cutting, but I mean fixed rates are still elevated, bond yields are kind of range bound here. And so I still look at the average, let's say, one bedroom condo that an investor would buy. And if you're running those numbers at, a mortgage rate of, 4.42, 4.3, 4.4, I don't see how any of those really make a lot of financial sense today. And so I don't know if those investors are going to be jumping back into the pool next year. And then, yeah, I think the same thing on the pre-construction side. It's like, we just had this long conversation, but if you look at all the pre-construction, the math, like it's so much more expensive now to buy pre-construction than it is to buy in the resale market. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, I mean, I haven't seen any new condos launched in downtown Vancouver for less than like $2,000 a foot. It's just it's basically developers like, unless I can get like 1,900, 2,000 a foot, I ain't launching. But like I can go and sell, a 2-year-old building downtown for 1,400 a foot. You can go buy one of Bosa's buildings for, it's 2 years old, and you can pick one up for 1,500 a foot. So why would you pay 2,000 a foot for new construction? Because the developers can't launch them for really any cheaper. And so I just think investors, now that the market's soft and the outlook for price appreciation is pretty glim, they're just like, now people are finally running the math and saying, well, hold on a minute, maybe this doesn't make sense. Why am I paying 15, 20, 30% above resale prices?
Good
Fair.
point.
Which leads to your supply side, because I think that housing starts are going to continue to fall off, and that'll probably sow the seeds for the next shortage. But I think that's years away.
How about you, Mark?
Uh,
2025.
Crystal ball. Okay, for the multifamily market, I think we're going to have a busier year in terms of liquidity. So just putting values aside, a lot of buyers and sellers have been holding off making decisions because they've been waiting and waiting and waiting for things. And whenever there's a change, whether it's interest rates or policy, generally there's a pause in the market, and that's just human nature. I think now people are feeling more comfortable that we've had a reset in the market. Interest rates have come off, but we're not going to see 1.5, 5-year money anymore for years to come. I think that we've stabilized on the interest rate. If anything, I'm hearing that rates have plateaued. Maybe they'll creep up a little bit, but I don't imagine more than 25 basis points up or down over the next little while. So I think from that perspective, we're going to have some stability. I think we're going to have more trades in the market. More people are definitely wanting to sell right now because they've been holding off the last year, year and a half. And people are selling for all the reasons why they normally sell. They're getting on death, divorce, sickness, estate issues, probate, you name it. Um, People have been holding off, but now we're going to see more product. I think with pricing's come off over the last couple of years, and we're down about 20-25% from the highs that we had, and I think it's pretty much holding steady. Cap rates have risen, so for older wood frame product, we're generally between mid 3 to 4 cap range, in some cases just over 4 cap for wood frame older product. Um, but I think the worst is over in terms of like not having buyers and sellers coming together and that lack of velocity in the market. I think we're in a much better position now, but I do think that we still have a lot of challenges. And the market moves in mysterious ways, but I think we're going to have more activity. And it's also going to be interesting. There's other factors. I mean, we have to think outside of Vancouver. There's a lot of global things happening right now. We're going to have a new administration south of the border. We're going to have the Trump show for another 4 years. So every day there's going to be something else happening in the world. We're all connected. There's a couple of wars happening right now. And, so I think, yes, provincially, municipally, the politics affect business here. But I also think we have to be aware that there's massive global shifts happening right now that are going to affect us as well. How it affects us, I don't know. But that's Steve's podcast, The Looney Hour.
Good plug. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, it's probably a pretty good place to wrap it up. Thank you both for doing this. Um, and Merry Christmas to you both. If people wanted to follow up with you, track you down, like Mark, where would they or where should they go?
Well, that is the very important question, Stephen. You could subscribe to goodmanreport.com and we'll hit
Isn't it
you.
goodmanreport.com/podcast now? No, not
No,
yet.
I don't have that yet.
Not yet.
Just Google goodmanreport.com, go to the contact page, sign up. We'll send you listings, sales, news, views. And then I got a podcast now, which is on all the major platforms, Spotify and iTunes. And I guess you just throw in Goodman Report and you can follow me. I'm on X, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on
All the
Instagram,
places.
and I started a TikTok account, which is very exciting.
Nice.
You're ahead of
Yeah.
me.
Huh?
TikTok.
You're ahead of me.
I put up a video. I got this 20-year-old kid who amazing. I had a condo for sale, um, personal condo for sale, and my realtor told me, hey, this young kid came in and he wanted to do a film of the condo because he's trying to build his business. And I said, okay, great. Let him advertise it for no problem. Anyways, he does my condo. It's in the Woodwards building. It goes viral, 175,000 views. I'm like, this is incredible. So I called the guy and I said, hey, could you do a video for my apartment building on York? And he goes, an apartment building? That's really not my market. And I said, well, I'll pay you. Just come and do it. So he did the video, and I'm telling him what he needs to put into the script. I'm like, the price per unit's this, and the cap rate's that, and the assumable mortgage is this. And he says, well, what's a cap rate? So I explained it all to him, and we did the video. Anyways, he put it on his channel, and he's had 80,000 views already. I don't know if it's the right market, but exciting nonetheless.
Great.
If you had asked me, would Instagram be a place to put your properties for sale? Generally, I would have said no. But listen, maybe TikTok is the next place to be.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. You never know who's on there. It's I don't know. I always thought that about various different channels. I was on YouTube for a long time, and then just seeing the people that come in off that, you're like, the amount of people, you just never know who's tuning in.
You never
Someone
know.
just swipes in one direction, the algorithm picks it up, and
Yeah.
Yep. So, Steve, where should people find you besides, I think, Looney Hour is the number one finance podcast in the country?
I don't know if we're number one, but we're working on it. But yeah, the Looney Hours, the weekly podcast. I've got my real estate show on YouTube every Saturday. X or Twitter at Steve Saretsky. So, and then I read a Substack as well. So I don't know. You can just Google
Sweet.
Steve Saretsky and
I
whatever
will.
media source floats your boat. You got everything.
Now,
Awesome.
where do you find Addy? How do you sign up to
Appreciate it.
where do you do that?
You go to addyinvest.ca. You can create an account for free, and you can invest in institutional commercial grade real estate across the country and now American properties.
Awesome.
So, yeah, appreciate that. Thanks, Mark.
No problem.
All right, so thanks, guys. I will put those links to everything we just talked about below. Mark, if you can send me those TikToks, I'll include them in the show notes below so that people can check them out. But thank you guys both for doing this.
Sure.
We should definitely do it again.
Likewise.
Thanks.